Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really big subject, one that many think they know, but its real scope is often missed. We're talking about slavery in British America, pauses, forms, and resistance. Prepare to have some assumptions challenged.
Yeah, our goal here is really to unpack how slavery wasn't just in one area, but actually across all the British colonies. We'll
Yeah.
get into the economic and social forces behind it, look at how the laws evolved, which is pretty brutal, and really importantly, explore the ways enslaved people fought back.
We've been looking through a lot of historical accounts and research for this, trying to piece together the key details. So let's get started. Okay, first point, and this often surprises people, slavery was everywhere. It wasn't just a Southern thing. It was integral across all British colonies.
That's so important to grasp right at the start. And the scale. We're talking about the Atlantic slave trade bringing around 3 million captive Africans to British territories. That includes North America and the Caribbean. It was a massive operation.
And the journey itself, the Middle Passage, it's just horrific. The human cost during the transport, estimates are around 500,000 deaths. That's before they even set foot in the colonies.
It's staggering, and it tells you so much about the sheer brutality and dehumanization right from the outset. It wasn't an accident. It was part of the system.
So why? Why this huge demand for enslaved African labor specifically?
Well, it boils down to a few key things happening in the colonies. One, there was just tons of land, perfect for growing cash crops. Two, Europe wanted more and more of those colonial goods like sugar and tobacco, big demand. And three, they just couldn't get enough indentured servants. That system wasn't sustainable for the kind of scale they wanted.
Okay. But indentured servitude existed. Why the decisive shift? Was there a specific moment or a reason they turned so heavily toward African slavery instead?
There's a pretty strong consensus that Bacon's Rebellion in 1676 was a major turning point. It happened in Virginia.
Right, Bacon's Rebellion. What exactly
Mm.
happened there?
You had this situation where um, discontented white indentured servants actually teamed up with enslaved Africans. They rose up together against the colonial governor.
Wow. Okay. So different groups finding common cause.
Exactly. And that alliance terrified the wealthy white planters, the elite. They saw this cross-racial solidarity among the working class as a huge threat to their power.
Ah, so the fear of them uniting.
Precisely, the fear of losing control. So the reaction was to lean much harder into African slavery. It was a calculated move to create a labor force defined by race, making it harder for poor whites and enslaved blacks to see themselves as having shared interests. It drove a wedge.
Okay, that makes sense as a turning point. Now, you mentioned slavery was widespread, but it wasn't uniform, right? How did it look different in various regions?
Absolutely. There were significant regional variations. If you look at New England, for example, the farms were generally smaller. So while slavery existed, they held fewer enslaved Africans compared to other areas. Their farming just didn't demand huge gangs of laborers in the same way.
Okay, New England, smaller scale. What about the middle colonies?
In places like New York and New Jersey, you saw enslaved people on larger agricultural estates, yes, but also a significant number working as domestic servants in homes. And something often missed, the port cities. All the major ones, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Charleston, had substantial enslaved populations. They worked as sailors, dock workers, blacksmiths, in various trades vital to the city's economies.
So even in the North, cities were key sites of enslavement.
Definitely. But then as you move south to the Chesapeake colonies like Virginia and Maryland, and then further south, the numbers increased dramatically. Their whole plantation economy, especially with tobacco and later cotton, became utterly dependent on enslaved labor.
And the most extreme example.
That would be the British West Indies, islands like Barbados, Jamaica. That's where the vast majority of enslaved Africans forcibly transported by the British ended up. Their sugar plantations were incredibly profitable,
Yeah.
but also incredibly brutal and labor-intensive, driving an insatiable demand for enslaved people.
This brings us to the legal side of things, which is just chilling. How did the law evolve to support this system, especially into what's called chattel slavery?
Right, chattel slavery. The word chattel literally means property, movable property. So the law redefined human beings, enslaved Africans, as items, like livestock or tools. No rights, no legal personhood, just property.
And you mentioned influences from the West Indies?
Yes, the West Indian colonies were kind of pioneers in developing these harsh slave codes because their sugar economies were established earlier and were so reliant on enslaved labor. These practices and laws then heavily influenced how slavery developed on the mainland, particularly in the southern colonies.
So what were the key features of these laws as they developed?
Well, you can break it down into roughly four key developments. First, as we said, legally defining enslaved Africans as chattel, as property. Second, making slavery hereditary. Crucially, it passed through the mother. So the child of an enslaved woman was automatically enslaved, regardless of the father's status. This created a self-perpetuating labor force.
Ensuring the system continued indefinitely.
Exactly. Third, the laws just got harsher and harsher over time. We see specific examples appearing, like laws in the 17th century explicitly giving owners the legal right to kill an enslaved person if they resisted authority, often without facing murder charges.
Unbelievable impunity.
Yes. And other laws, like making it illegal for any black person, free or enslaved, to own weapons. Prohibiting enslaved people from leaving their plantation without a written pass. It was about total control and suppression.
And the fourth point.
Fourth, the laws actively worked to create a rigid racial hierarchy. They did this by outlawing interracial marriage and relationships. This legally enforced separation solidified the link between blackness and enslavement and whiteness and freedom, creating this deep-seated, race-based social structure.
So, facing this complete dehumanization, the stripping away of rights and humanity, how did enslaved people respond? Did they just endure it?
Absolutely not. Resistance was constant, even if it wasn't always large-scale rebellion. Enslaved Africans resisted in many ways, both covertly and overtly.
Let's talk about the covert ways first. The hidden resistance.
A really powerful form was cultural preservation. People secretly kept alive their traditions from Africa, their musics, stories, religious beliefs, naming practices, languages, in a system designed to strip them of their identity. Holding onto their culture was a profound act of resistance, maintaining community, maintaining humanity. And then there was daily resistance, things like slowing down the pace of work, pretending not to understand instructions, breaking tools, damaging crops. Small acts that chipped away at the enslaver's profits and control.
Sabotage, essentially. But what about more open defiance? You mentioned overt resistance.
Yes, there were outright rebellions. A major example is the Stono Rebellion in South Carolina, back in 1739.
What happened during the Stoner Rebellion?
It started with a small group of enslaved men, likely from the Congo region of Africa, who broke into a store, stole weapons, and killed the white owners. Then they started marching south, hoping to reach Spanish Florida, where they believed they could find freedom. As they marched, more enslaved people joined them. They burned plantations, they killed more white colonists along their route. It grew quite large for a time.
How did it end?
The colonial militia eventually caught up with them. A battle ensued, and the rebellion was brutally put down. Most of the rebels were killed in the fighting or captured and then executed, hanged.
So it was ultimately suppressed. But what was the impact?
Even though it failed in its immediate goal, Stono sent shockwaves through the colony and beyond. It shattered the myth that many enslavers liked to tell themselves that they were benevolent figures caring for contented, childlike people. It was undeniable proof that enslaved people hated their condition and were willing to risk everything to fight and die for freedom. It showed their agency, their refusal to accept enslavement.
Okay, so let's pull these threads together. We've seen that slavery was foundational across all British America, not just isolated regions.
Right. And driven by powerful economic needs for labor, land, and profit, but also shaped by social fears, especially after events like Bacon's Rebellion pushed elites towards a race-based system.
We also explored how the law itself was weaponized, creating chattel slavery, stripping people of humanity, making the condition hereditary, and enforcing racial hierarchy.
But crucially, despite that immense oppression, enslaved people constantly resisted through preserving culture, through daily acts of defiance, and through violent uprisings like Stono.
It really underscores how deeply this institution, with its specific legal framework of dehumanization and racial division, got embedded into the colonial structure.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a significant question to think about, one that echoes long after abolition. How might that very specific legally constructed system of chattel slavery, the enforced dehumanization, the rigid racial lines, how might that have created a legacy, a kind of deep structural imprint that continued to shape American society and its inequalities for centuries? Something for you to consider.
A powerful question indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's offered a clearer, perhaps more challenging perspective on this vital part of history.